All right, I am excited to be back with James Fiorentino, not just a world renowned sports artist, but just an artist. And we have a little bit of a kind of entangled history in that I managed the Gallery E for the Baltimore Orioles back somewhere 99, 2000. I think I left 2001 with Cal's retirement. And at the time, it was actually the world's largest sports art gallery, and we will talk about some of the artists we carried there. But certainly, James Fiorentino was one of those artists, and I got to know his work. And then social media, 20 years later, our paths kind of recrossed, and it's really a small world, and it's a small sports world, and a small sports art world, and a small sports hobby, as we all know. So, with that long introduction, James, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get right into it because we're going to touch on your work later. But one of the themes I like to really touch on is the passion people have for sports. I think anybody who's listening or watching this has a passion for sports as well, or they wouldn't be tuning in. So, real quick questions: where did you grow up, and literally who were your guys from a young age? Who did you want to see if they were on TV at bat, or was it not baseball? Kind of how did you get started at that point?
Yeah, I think, obviously, like for me, the art started a little earlier, but still at a very young age. For me, sports wise, I grew up in central New Jersey. I was introduced to the Yankees before I can remember. So, and that came from my mom, really, who was a huge Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris fan. So I was definitely sporting the gear in those early 80s with the Yankee stuff. And my grandfather would talk about Joe DiMaggio, being Italian, obviously. So, at that range, we're talking like mid 80s, really starting to get into it, starting to collect some cards. It was the New York Giants who were winning the Super Bowls, the New York Yankees, even the Mets. You're a young kid, so you're kind of into anything happening around you. So the 86 Mets were exciting. Um, and really, I would say for me, it was the Knicks for basketball. So it was those sports and growing up playing, baseball, football, and basketball. But baseball was always my main sport, and my guy was Mattingly. So like he was like the godlike character when you're a kid. So I think probably my first games were around 85, 86. So he was obviously, and the hobby was starting to really take off too, all around this time period. So seeing him and watching games, Winfield, Henderson, Mattingly, that was the time period for me.
Great. So the Mets. I guess first of all, I love your Dwight Gooden painting. It is one of my favorite. Just kind of that stare he gives from the mound. So I love that, and you can see the influence and the passion. But your family was more Yankees, and you were a Mattingly guy. I mean, are you allowed to root for both teams? Was there rivalry there?
Yeah, you know what? I think as I grew up too, and I still am. Like I'm not. I root for the Mets, and especially when you're around all these players over the years, whether it's Gooden or David Wright or any of these guys on the team that I was painting and presenting artwork to or became friendly with. It's hard not to root for them. The better that the Mets do around here, the better for me for someone being asked to do something. But growing up and idolizing a guy like Gooden, and eventually obviously pitched for the Yankees through the no hitter. But I ended up becoming a friend with him, and it's crazy to think that you're drawing these guys when you're younger, you're idolizing them pitching and playing, and then as I've gotten older, to be around these guys and be friendly with them is pretty cool.
So were you on the Mattingly side of the Mattingly Wade Boggs debate? And then how did you feel when Boggs became a Yankee?
That's interesting. I think, obviously the Red Sox are a bigger rival. I don't consider the Mets and the Yankees a rival, really. You know what I mean? They're different leagues until you play the Subway Series and all that kind of good stuff. But no, I mean, like it's funny. Like even as a Red Sox, I wouldn't say hater, but a person who roots against them. Obviously, when the Yankees are playing them, I was excited to get Boggs. Boggs is like to me, I'm more of a baseball fan
Right.
in general. So like having a guy like Boggs on the team was incredible, and even going in that direction with the Red Sox, appreciating what Clemens did. Obviously, he became a Yankee, and Garcia Parra and Big Poppy, and like I'm just such a baseball guy that I just love seeing guys play. So so I don't think it's ever affected me that much like that as a fan.
Well, let me ask you a question. I've last I've asked other people who have gotten to know athletes and met them, and you're a little bit unique in that you had, and correct me if I'm wrong, your first piece in the Baseball Hall of Fame when you were 15. And so, like you said, you were meeting athletes pretty young. But do you remember a point where it shifted from the guys you saw on the baseball cards to the human beings you were talking to? Was there a transition, or were you so young that it was just more casual?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you, like, I think back now because now we're talking about 20, 25 years ago. And really a lot of people are very interested in that stuff I was doing at that age because now obviously the industry has become so big and whether it's the hobby and sports art and things like that. And I'm thinking back to when I was meeting these guys. You know, it was I think the current players while they're playing is always more unique. I mean, at 14 meeting DiMaggio, at 15 really becoming friendly with like Yogi, being at his house. I think back to being around Rizzuto and Whiting, and obviously like Ted Williams, which was a little when I was 17. But being around all those guys at a very young age, I was always a big history guy. So even at a very, very young age, whether it was like we were just talking before, whether it was 8, 9, 10, 11, I was into guys I never saw play. So I was more fascinated by the guys from the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. But it's always exciting, even still today, to be around a guy who's very current, playing in his prime, playing unbelievable, and you're around those guys at this time. But yeah, I mean, just the history side of it, and then realizing, oh my God, like I look back now and I'm looking at like I collect, for example, as like a side note in the hobby, like I'm collecting the 53 set, love the 53 set, and I could tie that in with artists. But I look in that set, and many of these guys I had met, which I can't believe. I knew him, he was friendly to me, and I'm like, geez, I'm so appreciative and blessed that I started very young, to be around all those guys at that time.
Uh, I want to talk about you mentioned the Ted Williams project. The Ted Williams had to fill people in at one point created a list of, and this was the Ted Williams list of the 20 greatest hitters of all time. And do I have that correct? And you were brought in
Yeah.
and had a relationship with Ted. Can you talk about that process? And then I want to actually talk to you about the list itself.
Yeah. So leading up to that, really and most people have heard me speak or the story was again transitioning from being an athlete as a little kid, playing constantly and collecting cards and being so into it. I figured out like, hey, I'm gonna get something autographed. I'll get something special. I'll have a painting signed, and it was Joe DiMaggio, which I still have. And then going into the Hall of Fame at 15, having the painting of Reggie Jackson there, and then it was just I feel like a lot of good moments, the right moments at the right time. But I was always very much hustling and doing as much as I could to get out there at that time. And Ted Williams Museum had seen my stuff at a show, and that was they had just completed, I think, their first year at the museum. So this was going to be the second year, which was the 20 greatest hitters that Ted Williams was choosing. He had come up with a mathematical formula on this. There was a book, almost like he was really way ahead of his time by figuring out all this kind of almost like OPS stuff.
Yep.
So he came up with more guys that were more probably power hitters in his 20 greatest hitters, and obviously he didn't choose himself, which they had told me to put in the middle. I had flown out there to meet Ted Williams in 1994. I think the winter of that year, and then in 90. Wait, was it 95? I'm trying to think now. Yeah, and in 95. I think February of 95 was the 20 greatest hitters induction so after meeting Ted for a long time that particular day and going over the painting, I came back for the event in 95 with my parents. I was only 17 years old. And that's where, Mantle, Mays, Ted Williams, Hank Aaron all sitting at the table next to me. Going back to when I was talking about my mom brought over Mickey Mantle to sign that original painting. So all the players that were alive at the time, including Mays, Kiner, Schmidt, I think Musial, all had signed the original painting, which to me, that painting now, like where the world is, where collectibles are, that to me may be one of the most significant sports paintings, baseball paintings maybe ever done that's out there. And I'm actually really excited because this will be the first time ever I'm going to actually showcase that original at the National, which it hasn't been seen since It actually hung in Ted's house for a while, and then it was at the museum. So that's going back all the way to '95.
Well, that answers my next question of can I have the painting? So I guess I'll have to wait till after Atlantic City. But let me ask you: did the baseball fan in you, and this is I want to separate this from Ted's personal, decision. Did you ever look at that list as you're working on and said, I don't know about this guy, or this guy should have been on the list and wasn't included? Do you have that part of your sports brain, or is it totally isolated as a separate project on the artist side of you?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think a lot of times when I'm painting any of these projects, I'm really looking at it from an art standpoint. So for me, like you said, like I'm an artist no matter what. Like I'm not a sports artist. I'm an artist. I'm a painter. I'm an
But
illustrator.
you're a history fan, and that's why I asked because
Yeah, and yeah. So for me, that was actually super exciting because the guys on there, Jimmy Fox and Hellman and Hornsby and Jules Joe Jackson. I mean, there were some amazing guys on there to look up and to figure out. So that was extremely important to me. And actually, like I remember meeting Ty Cobb's son there, who was very old at the time. So all the things that kind of tie in with history and obviously the art side of it's amazing.
I heard you talk in another interview, and I deal with private clients, so we can just talk about the larger subject because it made me chuckle. Was some of the players that have asked for private commissions or families that have asked for private commissions of non Hall of Fame players or lesser known players have more of a, we'll call it a personal attachment for them. Do you ever get a commission for somebody that just gives you a smile? Somebody in your childhood you never thought in a million years would end up being a private commission type of player?
You mean on a particular player or from the player?
Either way, just where I can't believe I'm painting. I'm from Baltimore. Let's say Rene Gonzalez, our backup infielder from '89. That you end up in a situation like I can't believe I'm doing this guy.
Yeah. I mean, I've painted so many players and a lot for players. I think being around those guys sometimes is actually very exciting. Like, and again, like becoming friendly with, whether it's like going way back where maybe I'm hanging out with Pat Kelly to guys like Ramiro Mendoza, who's a friend,
Yep.
you think about what a great guy and all the things he had done and winning 5 World Series. So yeah, there's guys that I'm around all the time that aren't the Cal Ripken names, and a lot of those guys I've become very friendly with. I mean, and a lot of that also, you know, comes to fruition from being on boards and celebrity golf outings, a lot of committees I'm on and different things. So I've been around just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guys over the years. So yeah, it is pretty cool to and even like celebrities beyond sports, like you're hanging out with, and maybe you watch them on TV or in
Yep.
movies and stuff. So a lot of surreal moments, certainly in my career, with all those types of guys, whether on a massive, big level, whether they're presidents to right players that are from the smaller side. But to me, it's like anyone who could play a professional sport or be in that spotlight. It's incredible to paint because as an athlete myself and a guy who played baseball in college, I realized like how incredible it is to just even get to any level, let alone like single A, double A, triple A, the major leagues. It's just to be that good is incredible.
My wife says I'm not allowed to tell the story anymore, but I played up to metro level ball with guys who got drafted. So that's as far as I made it. She said I'm not allowed to tell the story once you're more years away from the actual event than it was to your birth. So, but yeah, no, and that was my passion, and I got into it. And I guess let me take this from the collector standpoint. You're involved in the hobby, and you're around, us real crazy card people all the time, and getting away from the art for a second. It is the same passion. I think whatever your hobby is and whatever you do, and getting away from the sports, your other art, your non-sports, you just touched on it. Whether it's people that are in other industries or entertainment, or whether it's your wildlife. Talk about, I guess, your passion for the non-sport stuff in your life. And then the one thing I hear from collectors a lot is that they've had this kind of love affair with baseball and the hobby, but at a point in their life, they either backed off and something else stepped up. Did you go through that with painting ever, where you took maybe a little back seat on the sports and did a little bit more of the wildlife?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you a long answer because I think it's really important what's kind of going on, especially for me. So obviously, like my whole life and growing up, I had painted everything I love, which I'm still doing today. Whether I was 8 or 9 and I was painting things around me, painting people I knew, painting wildlife, nature, and obviously painting sports, and that obviously continued to be a profession for me. Um, I was doing because I laugh. I see a lot of these guys who have been doing stuff more recent. There's a lot of guys who are into sports now who've never painted sports because they see how big it is now, the success of Tops and all the cards and the projects that they've been doing to just anything because that world has just become huge. Whether it's from a collector standpoint and projects that need to be done, so I had been doing it from obviously 15 and 25, 30 years ago. So I had been doing the Nationals and All Star Fan Fests and the Baseball Hall of Fame and having worked there and just being there for many, many inductions. And then I feel like, and it's always been steady. So it's been steady for me for 25 years, but I felt like I needed more as an artist. So, right, at some point, what I started to do was really work on things that were also non sports. And there was a period of time where I did a lot of modern artwork. I did a lot of large oil acrylic paintings. And I may like even showcase over time here, maybe even the NFT space with some of that work, which is kind of fun, which I did 20 years ago. But I was really starting to work on my craft in watercolor from like a master position where I was doing landscapes and portraits of people and everyday life stuff, and I was and wildlife and nature. And so for the wildlife and nature, I would become a signature member of the Artists for Conservation group for Society of Animal Artists and have my works in museums all around the country and around the world. So really, and winning awards and really showcasing like I have a passion for this. I can be very successful in this as well. Same with portraits and painting people and having, this year I'll have 4 or 5 paintings going to different museums all around the country that have nothing to do with sports. And all of that kind of stuff and watercolor societies and American watercolor, national watercolor. So what I was really doing was setting myself up for now, where now you look at me and you say, well, why am I paying this for one of James Fiorentino's works? And it's because it's 25 years of doing it. It's all the history of what he's done, but it's also like beyond the sports side of it. So when you're seeing his work, it's not just me painting baseball; it's painting everything and all sports. And so really giving you know, stability in what I do as an artist and from a collector standpoint, whether whether it's there's only one where I'm doing the big trading cards or if it's elite or any of these things. And now people, for the first time ever, I feel like, and this is probably the last few years, are really seeing all this work as investments. I don't. I mean, I'm really excited that people feel that way. That's amazing. That's a real, credits, I guess, what people feel like I've done over the years. I love people collecting my work, being involved with me personally, and all the things I do. But I see a lot of people now, which is great, that are seeing these artists and their works the same as if you're buying a game used jersey or a rookie card of somebody. Why, if you pay $1 million for this card, what would this painting be worth of this artist who's very successful? So I love it. So it's starting to kind of all push into where it should be. And why not? Comic artwork has been incredibly successful, old illustration art. So it's finally starting to get its due. Maybe it's the right time for it. And I feel like I've been very lucky and blessed to be in the right spot for it. So
I was talking to somebody, and the interesting commentary was art people have always been too snobby for sports, and sports people have always been too snobby for art. And it's kind of that interesting cross. And I'm very proud that we had a sports only art gallery going back, 20 some years. I mean, yeah, I said it was the world's largest. What I probably didn't say, it was like one of two in the world. So, we were just bigger than the other one. And so 20 years later, fine art has always been an investment. Fine art has always been something. This is just, to me, a different subject matter that maybe wasn't as appreciated, and now you're having people who grew up seeing sports art appreciating what that value means in their home. Where my parents' generation, unless it was a Neiman or a Rockwell, probably was not exposed to as much fine art that had sports as a theme. Which brings me back to the gallery. And I remember one of the problems we had at the time was quite simply finding artists that had enough of a sports portfolio. There was not a lot of artists who could make a living with sports as a subject at the time. And I think that was one of the reasons where you were a little bit unique. I mean, listen, we were, dealing with Rockwell Prince, and he did the famous Brooks Robinson, Gee Thanks Brooks in Baltimore, you have to have. At what point did you realize you could stick with sports professionally if you wanted to? I mean, you have the luxury of doing what you wanted. When did you know that sports was going to be carried in fine art? And do you feel like that transition has happened, or is it taken 20 some years and we're just hitting it now?
Yeah, so at that time, going back to 93, 95, when I was first starting and having worked seen nationally in media and magazines, I think by the time I was doing probably the Ted Williams and into the Ripken project, where I was about a junior in high school, I started making very good money. So, I was about to go into college, and I ended up very proudly paying for my entire college through my sports art. And, back then, obviously, people would be calling you up, sending you letters. So, people were starting to pay me really good amounts of money then for my original artwork, and I was being commissioned constantly. So, throughout college, whether it was working, on the, I mean, that after the Ted Williams being the official artist for Cal during 21-31, sorry, I got to get this. When I was getting national attention, and that really took my career off because, Dick Schaap interviewing me for ABC World News, being on the field when after Cal broke the record to be interviewed by CBS this morning the next day and being a guest of his, the ESPNs. And I'm starting to actually finally showcase all those old interviews, all big national interviews on my social media. So when that was happening, a lot of people were coming in, people were commissioning me. So when I graduated, knock on wood, for the last 20, 25 years, I've been booked constantly. And again, as we talked about, it evolved into other things, which also enabled me to paint for a living as well. But I'd say with everything I've done, it's always been 75, 80% sports. I think the difference now is that obviously, and you hope to do this as an artist, that my work now has just become worth a ton more, you know, and that's what you want as an artist. And although I'm young compared to how successful artists can be, I've been doing it for so long, that has helped me. But at that time during the gallery that you were talking about, I had the 21-31 artwork. I was Mattingly's official artist when he had Mattingly Dead Yankee Stadium. I had, Prince with Yogi. I did Cal when he ended the streak, which was a cool story. So I had a lot of reproductions I was doing with players and working with players, and was starting to get a name. Whether I was on, I was in all the Beckett magazines back then. I had tons of stories, Sports Collectors Digest, and covers, and just doing all of that stuff at the right time. Working for Topps in 1999. Going back talking about artists. Growing up looking at guys like Dick Perez and Neiman and Christopher Peluso and all these guys who I admired growing up, and then doing all that work at a young age with those guys, that is really what catapulted me into everything. And so now guys who are seeing me for the first time, and which is why I'm excited at the National, because there's a lot of young guys in the hobby, and even new people who are to the hobby that are older, they're going to see like, oh, I didn't realize that you did this and this and this. Oh my God, you painted for him, and so that's and so now from a social media standpoint, you got to constantly get the stuff out there, remind
Yep.
people, let people know, to say, wow, I can't believe the stories you have and all that good stuff from when you were younger.
I'm going to give you a little bit of props here for somebody who is more New York centric. I'll call you. You actually have a lot of ties, and you mentioned with Ripken, you've got a kind of a Forrest Gump Baltimore relationship here. You keep popping up at these random times, so I'm going to go down a couple and tell me if I miss anything, and then I do want to hear some of the stories. You were the artist that was hired by Ripken's group. I think it was Ironclad at the time with John Murren and those guys. So you were the official artist there. You were one of the original artists in the Orioles Gallery E. You, I think, in the last year or the year before, everything's running together. You painted, if I'm correct, the painting that was given to Trey Mancini as the comeback player of the year. And I also saw that you've actually even done some Baltimore Colts vintage football. So tell me, first of all, we love the love in Baltimore, but is there any reason you kind of ended up with these Baltimore ties? Is it, I know some of the background connections of the agents and some of the PR people with some of the Yankees and they overlap. Was it simply those types of connections, or was there something that drew you to the streak into Baltimore?
Yeah, I think doing all the press after that, but I love Baltimore and I love Camden Yards, one of my favorite ballparks. Such a great place to be. So we love going there as a family. But I think just the connection with Ripken at the time, and then you just you gain a lot of clients from that area. So I'd have being able over time to be around Brooks Robinson, painted many times, and Frank Robinson, and even Johnny Unitas going way back. Obviously Trey Mancini last year, which was amazing, and able to meet him. So there's always certain players, Matthew Don, who obviously left for the Patriots, but like developed a relationship with Matt and painted him. So I think over time you're always around different players, and Baltimore is obviously close to me. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of different cities, and I think doing it for so long, you end up having connections even with Babe Ruth and doing a lot of stuff with the Babe, and being from Baltimore. So I'm always excited to paint, all different teams from all areas, and again going back to the history of it, how it's so exciting to be around a guy like Brooks Robinson. You know what I mean? How could you not be excited by that? So anytime I have a chance to do any kind of legendary Baltimore athlete, that's always fun. And I'm probably even missing stuff I've done, even being around the Preakness. I've
Yep.
done a lot of horse racing, and been paying that for over 20 years, and being there as a fan, and following 20 years ago Funny Side, who almost won the Preakness. And actually I just posted something of Jose Ortiz, who won the Preakness a few weeks ago, and I painted an image of him that was given to him at the
Edit-
Zeros Cup in Saratoga. So there's
e-
always these weird
but
connections all over.
real quick, editorial commentary, just so all the horses know, you have to show up to win. If you win in Kentucky, you have to show up to the Preakness if you want
Oh,
the Triple Crown. I just
right.
want to throw that out there as a Baltimorean who doesn't like being skipped over for the Preakness.
Yeah, that's all. We were talking about that today, ironically, this morning. How there's been a trend apparently now of obviously holding back some of the horses, which never was. So it seems like that's the thing now.
I mean, now that we've gone off the deep end, yeah, evidently now it's a 4 week training schedule for most of the horses, where for years it was a 3 week training schedule. So the way it spaces out would throw them off the training, and now they're talking about spacing them even further. But now I feel like we're talking about old baseball players. In my day, the horses were tougher. Um, okay, so you've mentioned the national a couple times. So when you head into something like the national, you talk about some projects that are coming up. Um, is it all business for you? I mean, do you sneak away for a couple minutes and just kind of, put your hat down and just check out? I mean, do you check out collectibles? Do you not have time for that? Do you check out other
Yeah,
artists? Game respects game
yeah, no
sometimes.
doubt. So I'm bad in that I'm going to check out too much stuff. That's just the opposite. You know.
Okay.
So
Yep.
and the nice
Yep.
thing is, speaking of Baltimore, I haven't done the Nationals since it was in Baltimore many years ago. Again, I had stopped doing a lot of these
Great.
shows because I had my work in a lot of galleries, and which is, I guess it was a good bad problem with being so busy, so many events, so many things. Having my work in galleries, I kind of felt like I kind of phased out of it, and now I'm bringing myself back, which I'm excited because it's a whole different world out there. So I will be part of East Coast Sports Marketing's booth. I'm going to showcase probably up to 10, 12 original paintings, many of which no one's ever seen, which will be There's Only One, which is the iconic trading cards, which has been
Yep.
incredibly popular for me. Uh,
I think we're going to start putting up some pictures and let you talk about some of the art. I don't know if it'll all be at the national, but you
yeah,
keep talking as we go through stuff. Feel free to
yeah,
comment.
the
As we,
elite
yeah.
paintings you were mentioning before, like there's only one right there. So that has just been incredibly successful. The most iconic trading cards I've been painting only once, 22 by 30 original watercolors, like all my work. Um, we're going to do a lot of fun stuff. We're doing a book signing on this really amazing book that's coming out. We're going to get more details on that, which my work is in that book on Saturday. I'll have players coming probably in and out of my booth Friday and Saturday, who I'm friends with. We're going to stop by to see my work. Some exclusives I'll be doing there. I'll do some meet and greets at different times, but I'll definitely be walking around because there's so many people I know and I'll be introduced to. I love seeing other artists work. A lot of the artists I know personally, a lot of guys over time who have asked me to, help them on their career. So it'll be a mix of both. I'm a collector still, so I'll be looking at vintage cards. Sometimes I go looking for my own cards. Uh,
I mean, we're showing some of your work now. Your Jackie, your Hank Aaron, your Babe Ruth. I mean, these are stunning, James. Absolutely stunning. How long ago were
I
some of these
appreciate that.
painted?
Yeah,
Real
most of
quick.
them were commissions. The Babe was done for an event out here. So Linda Ruth Sassetti is a very good friend of mine. That's Babe's granddaughter. So that's a great tie-in. In fact, I think she owns that
Can we can
original.
we can we go back to Hank
Yeah, the
Aaron?
Hank Aaron I painted for a client probably
Yeah.
about, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, and Hank signed that original. That was a 16 by 20 original watercolor.
I mean, the and I'm going to come back to the technique in a second, but the combination of photorealism, but you also have your flair in there, and I want to come back to why photorealism is different than photorealism with a little bit of
I
artistic
appreciate your
skill
saying that.
mixed in.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
very cool. You're
yeah.
saying that because that is quite important.
All right, so we got Hank, Jackie. So I mean, you know one of the themes. I mean, clearly with you, and you said this. I'm restating the obvious. Is your love of history here, because the details and the significance of some of these for sports fans is pretty obvious. But just
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
niche too is
beautiful
right. So
stuff.
it's all watercolor. I mean, for me, like that particular painting, there's always something special with a lot of my paintings. It's not like I'm just painting a certain player. Like if I painted Hank Aaron, like I've been around Hank, and these guys saw my paintings. That Jackie, for example, was done for the anniversary of him hitting that home run in Jersey City, New Jersey, where his first at bat. Or his first game happened to be his first hit was a home run in Jersey City at Roosevelt Field. A friend of mine, the legendary Ed Lucas, a blind sports journalist, was there as a kid, and Ed and I have been great friends for many, many years, and I hear stories about that game. So I always have this tie to something very unique and special. I think anyone could paint these guys, but like again, I was around Mantle, I was around DiMaggio, I was around Ted Williams, and Yogi and all these guys. So I love that aspect of it because that's what's important. That's what drives your work up, the value of it, what you're doing. Like we said, going back to being a fan, being a player, all of that. And then I love what you just mentioned before, which is quite important to me, is the fact that yes, I'm photorealistic. My niche is watercolor. There are tremendous painters in acrylic and oils. I fell in love with watercolor from a young age, being taught water. I mean, I painted in every medium, but watercolor became my thing. It's a self-taught way of painting on a national, international stage. It's even unique for that, being in all these national magazines. It's a self-taught way, but it's my work. Like you said, it's a painting. I mean, sometimes you can be tricked. You see some of my paintings small; they look like photos, but there's something really incredible to go up close to an original, and that's what's going to be fun about the national. People, it's going to be almost like an art gallery. You're going to be able to see this stuff up close, and that is very special to me because there should be some kind of signature to your work that makes you separated from everyone else.
And you have to also respect the dignity of the subject that you're doing. I think you don't want to disrespect the subject and being able to walk that fine line. I imagine for you sometimes, how far do you push it? How far do you inject, James into so and so player, and how much, the so and so player, I guess, are they all already recognized? Is that something you consider, or just does it feel natural? You know what you want that player
I
to look
think I
like.
do know what the player wants to look like. I think I'm also very good about knowing the sport, like we were saying too, because that's important. Like, I'm not saying that someone who's, well, maybe I should. I think, like, and a lot of people are jumping into it who know nothing about sports, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think you can kind of tell. I've always felt like I've had a passion for some, and there's things I've painted that I'm not maybe into, but there should be, for me, it's very soulful, my work. I feel like I've had a lot of people be very emotional about my work, even the non-sports stuff, obviously. But for me, knowing the game, playing the game, knowing the player, being around the players, there is something definitely special about that. How to looking for certain images. I work from images that and many different references and come up with certain stuff. But like, right, why this looks better compared to something else. A lot of that comes from maybe even the collecting point of view as well. So all of that is important because it shows in your work. And I've always felt like my work not only looks like the person as close as you can get, but like has that soul, that grit, that sweat, that everything you want to see. Um, whether it's a portrait of an everyday life person or it's a portrait of Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali.
I married into an art family. I have absolutely no talent of my own, but I have a huge appreciation. My in-laws, for decades, ran a bronze foundry. They actually are the ones who did the bronze sculptures of United's outside
Mm.
Raven Stadium, the five retired Orioles at Oriole Park, some stuff outside of Red Sox Stadium, stuff all over the country. When they've worked with these commissions, and I guess what I'm looking for is if you've had these experiences at parts in the process. Now they're different; they're not the artists. They're fantastic artists. Toby Mendez did the Orioles projects, and what their founder does is blow it up into bronze. But the artist would actually have the athlete at a certain point of the project actually kind of get involved. So if you're doing a commission for an athlete, do they have any say or involvement? Or is it kind of, hey, here's some photos, I kind of want this piece, off of this photo? Or do they have involvement during the
I think it's a
process?
mix of both. It depends on who it is, if they're currently playing, if it's a retired player. But I've had, a lot of great involvement. I've met players beforehand to go over things. I've gotten certain, instructions on what to do and how to do it. It's a mix. I mean, there's obviously it's wonderful to be able to meet any kind of person you're painting ahead of time if you can. And I've done that as an artist, some sketches, and I'm basically working on photographs, whether I take a photo or someone's taking a picture for me, because my work is studio work, very detailed, But the more a person's involved, a player, an agent, and again, it depends on the project because I've worked with many players, many museum organizations, companies, Tops, Upper Deck, Kellogg's, you name it. Like they all, some are more involved than others. So it just all depends.
I am very excited for a project you have coming out. And this, I guess, because I'm a baseball dork and I love anytime somebody will make a list or rank anything that we can debate as sports fans. So, if somebody were to put together something called an Elite Series, what would that be, and what could
Oh
people look
yeah,
forward
this
to?
is cool. So this is a project I've been working on for I'm gonna say over a year now. Very similar to There's Only One in that it's 22 by 30 original watercolor paintings. I'm only going to paint this player once per year or so, and it's the best. So it'll be its own separate site, and it's all the greatest legendary guys. And the difference is there's they sign these original paintings, so it's also
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's
yeah,
that's
so it's
really
very
cool.
hobby like. There's only one. Most of them are not autographed by any of the players, the cards. But in these, whether it's guys like even some current guys, whether because there are some legendary guys, iconic, legendary elite guys now playing like a Mike Trout, like a Steph Curry, to guys like Bobby Orr and Emmett Smith and Peyton Manning. There's a really cool mix, and what will happen is we're going to just talk a little bit about how incredible these guys are, especially the guys who retire. You forget how unbelievable maybe a Bobby Orr was, or an Emmett Smith. You kind of forget because you're so into what's.
So, if there was an Elite Series that you were working on, what would that be, and it kind of explain the background of that?
Yeah, so the Elite Series came about almost a year and a half ago, and it's very similar to There's Only One as a 22 by 30-inch watercolor painting. The There's Only One is obviously the most iconic trading cards. I'm repainting these trading cards, but the Elite are literally the greatest players of all time in all different sports, whether they're currently playing now. And there's only so many elites. Like I was mentioning before, guys like Mike Trout, Steph Curry are part of this, to part of the series. The selection of a lot of the elite paintings are current guys, former guys, but all elite athletes. And but I am very excited about Elite only because I think it's my best work that I've done in many years. Again, painting at that size for me, 22 by 30, was a little more larger than I'm usually painting smaller pieces over the years. Although I've done big paintings, but the fact that they're all 22 by 30, they're all elite athletes, they're all autographed, and again, the concept of how cards are today and one of ones versus one of one original painting signed by players, I think it's a big deal. And to showcase them for the first time, softly at the National with three or four of them, and then most of them next year in the spring is going to be very exciting.
I love the idea of including the athlete's autograph on a one of one. It really kind of brings the whole circle together of the art, the collectible, the athlete. And you and I have been talking about it, but I think the passion also leads in the connection to the object. So whether that's a painting, whether of a certain person that means something to you, whether it's a ticket of a game you went to, whether it's a card of somebody you like, all of those have that same connection. Otherwise, people wouldn't buy it. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe people would buy it and hate the player they bought. James, I have no idea. But I would think most people have to have that connection. And it sounds like from your experience, it's almost more of an emotional sale than it is a physical one. Would that be true?
Yeah, and I think like from a collectible standpoint too. Obviously, I sell plenty of paintings like Manels and Clementes and Roos that can't be signed, and the there's only one trading card project. But There is something special, obviously, for me as a collector. We're right. It's a combination of both the hobby and the collectible and the autograph and an original piece of artwork. And so, to me, when you look back now, if you're looking back at a Bob Gibson or a Hank Aaron or a DiMaggio where they had signed a painting of mine, and there's only so many of them out there like that. It's like them putting their stamp of approval on your artwork. It's very rare. And for me, if you're collecting my work, there's only going to be so many Bob Gibson originals or so many Hank Aaron originals. And it'll be same with Elite. There's only going to be so many of these players that'll ever sign my painting, maybe once, maybe two, three, 4, 5 times, which is really not a lot over time of me painting because of how busy I am and all the works that I'm doing. So there is something very special, very collectible about that, very unique. And I think as the industry grows from a sports art standpoint, with everything that's really just going up in value, I think it'll become even more rare to have a lot of these paintings signed by these guys.
So what you're saying is there's not going to be a junk wax canvas era.
Right.
Right.
As,
We're not
as
going to
much
put,
as I,
yeah.
yeah, as much as I'd like to get a lot of my work done, you can only paint so fast. There's no helpers here. There's no magic elves.
Yeah.
It just takes its time, and that's the beauty of it. So,
I, I don't,
they
I,
are,
I don't want you to be Thomas Kincaid. You just keep being you. Um,
yeah.
so first of all, a long overdue thank you for coming on. Obviously, I've liked your work, heading back 20 some years. A quick old school shout out to Jerry Wachter's family, the former Orioles photographer. I do want to give a shout out to his family. We did carry some of his work in the gallery at the time, and he was a legendary photographer with the Orioles who really did some great artistic photography, and he's passed away, but I just want to give a shout out to them. Stephen Holland, John Stango, Arthur Miller, Leroy Neiman, Norman Rockwell, and James Fiorentino were my original sports art introduction lineup. As we say in all lineups, I got to talk to, I think, my cleanup hitter today. So look forward to seeing you at the National. And more importantly, where can people get a hold of you? And what are you doing for charity right now, either with wildlife or anything else, if people are interested?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So many good things going on this year. So you can find all the things I'm doing on jamesfiorentino.com. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram. I just got on Twitter. I held out very long, and I just saw my main man Derek Jeter just joined today or yesterday, which is very funny. So I just finally got on there. But a lot of good stuff this year. It's my 20th year in Saratoga doing this artwork for Center for Disability Service for the Ciros Cup. It's the first time doing the National in many years. Some great projects coming up. I'll be doing the Phillies show in December this year. So all those good things you could come out and see me. And I love meeting, everyone, whether they're the collectors or artists or whoever. So, and a lot of charity things I'm involved with. I appreciate the whole shout out with the wildlife and the nature because I'm involved with so many great organizations here locally in New Jersey, but do national work. That's a passion of mine, obviously, and to be involved in all those organizations means a lot to me. So thanks.
No, absolutely. I say it all the time. The best thing we can do to support the hobby is support each other, and we're all well-rounded people with lives and jobs and families, and we cross over into this one little niche. And our Super Bowl is coming up, so I'm excited. This is kind of the kickoff series leading up to the National, and I really, really want to thank you for coming on. And let's do a follow-up because I want to talk about watercolor with a dry brush and why you use such thick stock. Don't you know how dangerous that can be?
That
So
is cool. Thanks. Yeah, I'll go into that. We'll get some art viewers for that.
exactly. Well, James Fiorentino, thanks for being on the Baltimore Sports Collectibles podcast, and I will see you in Atlantic City.
Thanks. Appreciate it.